unleashed on the streets of Kingston. It was the last-ditch effort, the last grasp for political power by the opposition at the time, the Unity Labour Party. You see, while ostensibly there was talk of the proposed increase in remuneration for parliamentarians that triggered everything, the cold, hard fact is that the political dynamics of April-May 2000 were a major grasp for control of the reins of governance. A major grasp to take hold of the reins of political power in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That was what it was about. You see, they did not achieve it initially through the ballot in 1998 as they had hoped. Those who did not recognize that the street protests, the odd thing, and the walk on Granans Beach in Grenada were all part of a grand design to topple the then NDP administration and usher the ULP into the seat of government, need to have their heads examined. That is what it was, plain and simple. A grasp for power, political power. An anxiety to take hold of the big chair so that one could swivel. The strategy was as clear as day. But it is important for us to revert to the beginning of the process. It is important for us to return to the elections of 1998. Because for us, in many respects, that is where it all began. Vincent Beach, the leader of the party at the time in opposition, deeply hurt by his failed attempt at winning the general elections in that year, 1998, declared in the presence of the media that he would make the country ungovernable. It was a public declaration. Gonzalez had apparently not been with the then leadership of the ULP following the results of the elections the previous evening. He was also not amongst the leadership cordon when Beach, Boye, and Stanley Storky John appeared to have engaged in some sort of political discussion that led to the conclusion about making the country ungovernable. It appeared too that at the time of the pronouncement in the presence of the media, Gonzalez may well have been caught unawares. What was he thinking? What was he thinking? The man who would be king, what was he thinking? The great spin doctor, what was he thinking? What was he thinking? Because he was the deputy of the party. He was the deputy of the party that Beach led. But yet he was not part of that leadership cordon that convened and with the media present opted to make the country ungovernable. You see, remember that Beach and the ULP had won the popular majority. But our constitution stipulates not proportional representation, but first past the post. So James Mitchell won by 1 seat and decided that was enough for him. Don't tell me about any majority, overall majority. The election rules are clear. But it is so ironic that they were chiding Mitchell for mere 1 seat majority. But when they got a 1 seat majority, nobody must chide them. And they got it twice in a row. Twice in a row. 2010 and 2015. But we need to remember that it was the so-called group of concerned citizens that had brought together the St. Vincent Labour Party with more than 30% of the electorate, and the Movement for National Unity with just around 2-point-something to 3% of the electorate. That it brought them together. This group of quote-unquote concerned citizens brought these two parties together in an effort to topple Mitchell and his New Democratic Party. And in doing so, the group of concerned citizens was so influential that they put Vincent Beach as head of this new group, even though Vincent had only recently been defeated by Stanley Sorky-John for the leadership of the St. Vincent Labour Party. So they overturned the decision, in a sense, by saying you lost in your own party, which is the majority of this coalition. But we will still show you how much influence we have by putting you in charge of the coalition. And then taking the man from the 3% party and putting him as deputy, leaving Stanley Sorky-John out in the cold. That's how powerful wealthy people are when they want to influence elections. That's what they had done. Boye, Ken Boye, was something of a political neophyte, but perhaps perceived by some as opportunistic enough to wield a web around his charisma, such as would garner him some measure of support from the inexperienced. And so some saw him as perhaps capable of moving up the political ladder in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. A position that some others may have seen as perhaps hindering their own chances of climbing to the top. Following the Beach Declaration of 1998 to make the country ungovernable, in the face of the new political entity having won the popular vote at the polls, whilst losing the election by 1 seat to the incumbent NDP, Gonzalez would have immediately understood the political potential and the significance of having the triumvirate of Beach, Storky, and Boye grabbing hold of the leadership of the party, the ULP. If this were allowed to happen, he, Gonzalez, would lose his opportunity to access what he may well have considered his manifest destiny, i.e., to lead St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That is the kind of analysis we are making. Our perception of how things were at the time. And the intricacies of the politicking that took place. This is how the thing started. A positioning of people. And so, as we are going through this, it must be already thinking in your mind that is this how later on Boye and John got themselves expelled from the party? And since Beach was with Ralph, who was the third person to come into and create a triumvirate that was perceived as a major challenge to Gonzalez's leadership within the ULP later on? Who was that third person, and where is he today? You see, it was therefore imperative that Gonzalez forge a political strategy to ensure that once Beach demitted office, he would be the choice for leadership. After all, he was deputy. So, Gonzalez was therefore astute in ensuring that he maintained his silence in respect of the Beach Declaration to make the country ungovernable. They cannot say he said that. They cannot say he was so irresponsible as to be the one saying that. The dynamics of political intrigue and political strategizing. Beach understood that he had to step aside. He had lost at the polls too often. 1989, 1994, and again, however close, in 1998. So he was out the door. Gonzalez knew this as well. And the political strategizing had to be such that the latter, meaning Gonzalez, may well have seen the opportunity to access what he may have wanted all along: leadership of a political party of substance. Leadership of a political party with a membership that would give him a chance to become a serious contender for the big chair. You see, MNU could not have offered him that. The 3% thing couldn't get him anywhere in politics. He needed a party base, a party with some substance. And this was it. This new entity was it. At the party's election following Beach's resignation, Gonzalez was elected leader with Boye as his deputy. The political neophyte was elected to his deputy. And so you understand what we meant earlier when we talk about being able to weave a web with his charisma. The political neophyte entering politics really with any level of seriousness emerges as the deputy. Aye? But Beach was allowed to stay as leader of the opposition in Parliament, which we deemed a token of appreciation. You see, history revealed some startling intrigue. You remember that there was a document circulating that we call pseudo-legal and pseudo-intellectual. There was a document that made the wrongs in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. dubbed the case against Ken Boye. It was really intended to be some sort of pseudo-intellectual, pseudo-legal interpretation of the chances of Ken Boye emerging victorious in the case involving him and the Eastern Caribbean group of companies, which he headed for several years. And essentially, the documents seem to suggest that he had little chance of winning. Just another look at the time raised concern about the emergence of the particular document at that time, at that juncture in Vincentian political history. Because we were convinced that whoever wrote it appeared to have had a vested interest in giving the party the impression that you ought not to be putting your hopes on somebody like Boye because he may lose this important case, which may reflect badly on his character and therefore badly on the party if he is at the leadership level. To us, that was our interpretation of the document, the content, the intent, and the timing. The content, the intent, and the timing. Critical. Remember, Bernard John was helping Boye with communications. You see, the document was not even a proper legal brief. Because clearly the author of the document appeared to have gotten carried away by the intent rather than the substance. Boye, of course, did not lose the case in the final analysis years later. So whoever wrote it, whether or not he or she was a legal expert, ultimately had made the wrong analysis. That was proven wrong in the nation's court. But that was not of any significance. What was of significance was that such a document could have been prepared. And it could only have been prepared by somebody who had political ambitions and who perceived Boye to have been a threat to those ambitions. And therefore, the intent may well have been to undermine any chances whatsoever of a political neophyte like Boye emerging leader in this country. It may well have been a fear of Boye's charisma. So if we could chip away at that a little bit, then maybe, just maybe, people may lose confidence in him, lose respect for him. And so his political ambitions are swashed away. That is our interpretation of the content, the intent, and the timing of that document. In politics, everything is about timing. You see, the author of the document tried at best to appear profligate with legal knowledge and understanding, but could not escape being decidedly political in a clear strategy aimed at undermining any political ambition and influence that Boye may have on the people charged with making the decision in respect of leadership. But we live in a country what your name is, what your color is, and what your academic credentials are, all appear to have some value. Just Another Look is mindful that in the lead up to the 2001 general elections, there's a letter that appeared in newspapers suggesting that Ralph Gonsalves was the brightest man to lead the country. We believe that the author has since recanted and understood that the analysis was really inaccurate. Just Another Look is of the view that some of our people appear to give Gonsalves too much credit for intellectual depth and political strategizing. Just Another Look believe that much of what he has been credited for may well be mythical. There's a lot more to be said about Julian Francis's intellect and Julian Francis's sense of political strategizing. And Just Another Look is willing to say today without fear of contradiction that had Julian Francis not been playing the leadership role that he has been in the Unity Labour Party, they would never have seen political power. They would never have seen political power. It was Julian Francis who got together his A-team to make sure that in the middle of the night, Wastemaster bins were being overturned all over the place to effect a roadblock. Many of the politicians that turned up at the roadblock to talk for and on behalf of the party and expose themselves as political neophytes had no idea how the roads were blocked. They were asleep. They were comfortable in their beds. Some with their wives, some with their mistresses, some with their smallies. They had no idea. So when everybody is talking about, oh, Gonsalves so bright, Gonsalves has academic credentials, as do many people. Intellectual brilliance is something else. The academic awards often reflect your capacity in an exam room. Your intellectual substance is something that delivers every day. And it ignites those around you. We need to distinguish between intellectual depth and one's capacity to regurgitate. One's capacity to activate one's critical thinking skills. It's easy to talk. Anybody can do that. Intellectual depth takes a lot more. A whole lot more. The name dropping and so on, fanciful thinking might well be pure erudition. Much of it may be supercilious. So there's not been anything intellectually brilliant about Gonsalves' politics that we need to really talk about. You want to tell me about the dynamics of ULP politics? Talk about Julian Francis and the role that he has played in putting the party where it is. In politics, the coming together of different incidents often provide opportunities for change. At the time, willing opportunists garner much support and credibility. In hindsight, the reality reveals sheer opportunism rather than the originally perceived intellectual brilliance in terms of the fortunes of the Unity Labour Party. Some may recall that for a long time the ULP had been trying to jump on the bandwagon of anything that even remotely appeared to facilitate protests against the ruling New Democratic Party. You can list them. The party found itself in critical support of the Junior Bacchus-initiated protests for the cause of the Catholic schools. You remember that? Walk around town. The leadership of the Catholic schools. Junior Bacchus was instrumental in garnering support for that because he was associated with the institution. The party also found itself offering quote-unquote critical support to another Junior Bacchus-initiated omnibus owners and operators protest over the state of the nation's roads and the cost of vehicle parts. Remember that? At the time, dear friends, Junior Bacchus was credited for the initiatives and may well have been perceived as something of a potential political guru. In hindsight, it has become obvious even to the uninitiated that while Bacchus was a key ignition, the fuel for the crowds on the streets in the two aforementioned cases was always the Unity Labour Party. They found themselves there every time. That is the political strategizing. Following both protests, it was the ULP that emerged emboldened enough to better position itself as a viable alternative to the New Democratic Party. Perhaps it was James Mitchell's own authoritarian politics, an enlarged political ego that prevented him from seeing his own and his party's demise under his leadership at the time. For Gonzalez, every little activity counted. On the 18th of June 1998, the NDP was sworn in the nation's parliament. At the first session of the House of Assembly thereafter, which occurred on the 9th of July 1998, the ULP brought its people into the yard of Parliament. Into the yard of Parliament. They were protesting the appointment of Nolwenn McDowell as Speaker of the House, claiming that because he had lost at the polls, he should not have been given that office. The crowds went berserk, and Annie Eustace and Monty Roberts were the recipients of the most vicious attacks. Indeed, when Annie was attempting to drive out of the yard, somebody had to stop him and tell him, a man lying down in front of your front wheel. In front of your front wheel. That is the extent to which they went. There were no limits. There were no limits to what they wanted to achieve. It's interesting, you know, when they got into office, they make sure they ring the entire parliament yard. You can't get in. But it was all right for them to get in. At the time, they weren't concerned as to how it going to look in the international community. How it going to look. Right? That a man in protesting lie down in front of the wheel of Annie Eustace's car so he could get rolled over, and then they say he killed him for spite. They rocked Eustace and his wife in the car as if it was a hammock. There was no business about how shameful it looked. It looked good because it was the ULP doing it. They didn't care. They wanted to strike fear in the hearts of Eustace and his family and Monty Roberts. It didn't matter. But you have to understand how they were operating. Glenn Jackson. This is the timing of events, you know. All of these incidents occurred at the same time as part of the political dynamics. Glenn Jackson had lost his job at Radio 705 and had been seeking out new opportunities. He got one up at SVG TV doing the hits radio business that Randy Duppwell had started. He started the program Hits Talk. He, Glenn Jackson, started Hits Talk. And then from there, when WeFM started its operations in 2007, Glenn Jackson joined them 1 year later in 2008. Yeah, where he started the Shake Up program, a dynamic, hard-hitting daily program that eventually became the veritable mouthpiece for Gonzalez and his Unity Labour Party. In mid-November 1998, we had a protest in Kingstown outside government offices. Yeah? Against the government's agreement with the Italian government and the Italian group, Paletaro, for the Otley Shipyard and Marina for the repayment of $65 million. That became an issue, big protest. Yeah? This is in November of 1998. In the latter part of November 1998, the marijuana farmers decided to protest. And they were protesting the fact that the U.S., the government of the day was allowing the U.S. to come into the country and cut down the marijuana plants. In December, 1 year later, 1999, Dwight Venner, who had been leading a committee, Dwight Venner, head of ECCB, East Caribbean Central Bank at the time, submitted his report recommending salary increases for parliamentarians in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, noting that it should, however, only be implemented after integrity legislation and public sector reform had been undertaken. Integrity legislation and public sector reform. Okay? But seemingly unperturbed by the loss of support for his own leadership and his party, the NDP, James Mitchell, in April 2000, sought to introduce legislation for the proposed salary increases and benefits for parliamentarians. The teachers' union was at the same time pressing its demands for 30% increase in its negotiations with government. And that resonated well with his membership. And so the membership protest action started and grew in intensity. Fitzjones was at the time head of the teachers' union and head of the Labour Congress. And so he led the teachers' union into a head-to-head clash with government. And of course, the opposition, already objecting to any salary increases for parliamentarians and benefits for parliamentarians, was able to have the two issues meshed. They can't help public servants to give them the increase, but they could increase their already big salaries. That was the line on the street. It was as much political as it was industrial. There came a point where you could no longer distinguish between the political and the industrial. Yeah? So the protest garnered support, if only because the union's demands for 30% was consistently pitted against the proposed salary increases and benefits for parliamentarians, perceived as greedy and unwilling to do likewise for the hard-working teachers in the country. What was the chant? They're beating up on public servants. They're beating up on teachers. The ULP immediately pounced on the opportunity that availed itself, claiming some sort of critical support for the teachers' cause, and throwing into the mix claims that the ruling NDP was corrupt, greedy, and that graft was pervasive, unemployment at an all-time high. Few understood the immense political opportunism of the Unity Labour Party at the time. When the ruminants of the left and the leftovers inveigled themselves into the equation, we emerged with a new institution, the Organization in Defense of Democracy, the odd thing we call it. Who else could have created that but the ruminants of the left and the leftovers? There was little by way of voluntary membership, save and except those led by apologists for the Unity Labour Party, and these could have been counted on the fingers of one hand. Real politics revealed itself when it came to who should travel on whose plane headed to Grenada for the Grand Beach Dialogue. That is when some of the ruminants of the left and the leftovers found that there was no room for them on what they thought was quote-unquote their ride, and instead had to beg a ride on Mitchell's transport, much to their own incredible chagrin. It was then that they woke up and smelled the coffee of the political dynamics that were at play, and they were not intended to be part of the end game. Few serious analysts would deny the political ambitions of those who created and others who lent support to the odd thing. The ruminants of the left and the leftovers, having deluded visions of finally getting a place in the political sunlight, sought every opportunity to be in the Vincentian media. Not surprising, one of the ruminants of the left and the leftovers dared to suggest to the Vincentian public, the odd thing is here to stay, regardless of who wins the general elections, regardless of what happens. This Organization in Defense of Democracy is something that is needed. It will be a bastion of democracy in the country. The proclamation of the near-forgotten ruminants of the left and the leftovers was that they had finally gotten together and created an institution that would become a bastion of democracy, that would be forever in the national political watchdog. Of course, once the ULP had attained the electoral victory in March 2001, the leaders had no more use for the odd thing. The ruminants of the left and the leftovers were cast adrift once more and returned to lying prostrate before the new occupant of the big chair. Last Thursday's celebrations, dear friends, on the 4th of April 2019, was less about the ULP's 18 years in office and more of a celebration of the so-called roadblock revolution. Gonzalez and his minions can shout all they want about celebrating 18 years in governance. The Vincentian electorate understands only too well that there was nothing revolutionary about the blockage of the road. The ULP and Gonzalez will forever be indebted to Julian Francis and his A-team for blocking the roads and the effectiveness of the Wastemaster skips in this regard. The so-called political intellectuals were asleep, for the most part, as the roadblocks were being set up each night. They were perhaps reminding themselves of the Bolshevik Revolution, where the intellectuals appeared to have convinced themselves that they could best represent the working classes whose physical strength was being used at the time as their greatest political asset. Welcome to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Understand, dear friends, the nature of Vincentian politics. It was necessary in this edition of Just Another Look to remind us all of the chronology of events and the games that people played politically and otherwise. Those games are still being played, and they may have believed that over the years they have become very adept at them. The Vincentian electorate has also become very adept at understanding and seeing through the facade. And now you're hearing little corners that they're looking for candidates with degrees, candidates that they can put up and claim it's youth, it's qualified people, etc., etc. Well, you've seen what happened to the qualified people who have gone into their ranks. You've seen what has happened to them. You've seen the transformation. And you've seen a pullback. The big push that was designed to locate Camilo Gonzalez into the big chair has had to be pulled back a bit. And a new strategy launched to shore him up in another way and to build a base around him. But the Vincentian public will never allow Camilo Gonzalez to forget the incident with Yugi Farrell. Will the electorate forget as well? Time alone will tell. Today, the 6th day of April 2019, marks 4,484 days since the disappearance of SVG Air J8VAX. It was piloted by Dominic Gonzalez with one passenger, Rashid Ibrahim, on board. Disappeared without a trace. And just inside of 4 years, 3,164 days ago, we had the disappearance of another SVG Air aircraft, J8SXY, piloted by Suresh Lakram. He was on his way to a Mercy mission. That was Thursday, the 5th of August, 2010. Disappeared without a trace. As always, we leave you with a reminder that on the 19th of September 2008, Patricia Bowman was crushed to death in her car on her way to work. Her husband, Alban, is still awaiting justice. And nobody feels ashamed about that. Nobody feels ashamed that the entire global community knows that we had an extensive report on the disappearance of J8VX, however Mickey Mouse it turned out to be. But we've not yet seen a public report on the disappearance of the J8SXY. Why? Why haven't we seen one? And why, after all these years, Alban Bowman is still awaiting justice for his wife being crushed to death in her car on her way to work by the falling debris of somebody's wall? We're not ashamed to have the world know that that's how we administer justice in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Go pay for it yourself if you want justice, Alban. That's what they're saying to him. Enough said. You've been listening to another edition of Nice Radio's Callaloo presentation, Just Another Look. Just Another Look is an innovative, exciting, albeit decidedly provocative, and yes, certainly controversial, socio-political analysis of issues of a local, regional, and international nature. Just Another Look is heard only on Nice Radio. First aired on Saturdays at 6 p.m. with repeat broadcasts on Sundays at 9 p.m. You can always catch us on the World Wide Web, www.niceradio.info. You can always check out our Just Another Look blog, www.justanotherlook.com. I am, of course, Keith.